Welcome to the Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva, and today we're going to get some insight into admissions and financial aid. My guest today is the owner of Betterton College Planning. He's also a former director of financial aid as well as admissions at Princeton University, and welcome to the show.
Well, it's good to be here, Anthony.
Yeah, so usually I start my guests where they went to college. So where'd you go to school?
I went to Dartmouth College.
Oh,
quite a while ago.
Yeah, I bet. Okay. Usually what I try to do with my guests and to give to the audience is what was the process back then compared to what it is today? What's the process of what you go through to pick a school?
Well, this probably amazed people. So this has been a long time ago, obviously, okay? And as a side, back when I went to school, we took the SAT, but they never gave us our scores. So I don't even have a way to tell you what I got, okay? But in my case, the college process is a lot simpler. They say, look, next Saturday you're taking the SAT, you walk in, you brought your number 2 pencil, you took the SAT. So now my business and whatever is everybody gets into this early. There's all these steps. It's complicated. It's just a whole entirely different process. In my case, I had 3 colleges. I was a soccer player, so I was a recruit in some sense. I made some visits at Dartmouth, Lafayette, and I forget the third college. Took a recruiting visit to Dartmouth. I was sold on that, and luckily I got in. So I played soccer up there. And also when I was there, I was my scholarship was the Navy ROTC. Oh. So in return for my scholarship, I served in the Navy for a number of years.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So once you graduate college, how did you become the director of financial aid at Princeton? And then, now you're retired now, but
right.
How did you become all the way to that point?
Well, I went on Navy Sea duty for 5 years after I graduated, and then they have what's called a shore rotation. And my shore rotation was to teach naval science at Princeton. So I came to Princeton in 1965 as an assistant professor of naval science. I had a 3-year tour here, and then I basically decided to get out of the Navy, and I had a number of different options. I flew in the Navy, so I had airlines were one of my options. Wow. A couple other things in New York, financial, and one of them was an offer to go in the financial aid office at Princeton. My wife loved it being here. My kids were born here, whatever. Said, why don't you take that job briefly? And of course, 35 years later, I was still doing it. And as I say, 10 years ago, I retired. So,
wow.
Yeah, been here for a while.
Yeah. So let's go into admissions first, and then we'll go into some financial aid. So. What's the process of admissions at the college level? What have you seen by doing it at Princeton, and now that you do it a little bit on your own as well?
Yeah, the process is handling an awful lot of applications in a brief period of time. As you probably know, they usually have an early section where students apply let's say it's a high school senior. There's usually an option to apply to your colleges early decision or early action. It's usually in the month of November. So what colleges do, they try and get at least a portion of the class where they read early, get them out of the way, make their decision, and that cuts down on the total population. Still, the majority of students apply what's called regular admissions. Let's say Princeton, for example, gets 30,000 applications. Maybe 5,000 apply early, so they look at those and make their decisions. Now they've got 25,000 to do between January and March. So I think a big part of it is the sheer volume of the applications now. The high school population never been larger. International students, a high percent go to college now. It's 2/3 rather than 40% it was years ago. So I think managing the pure volume over a reasonable amount of time and making good, careful decisions really makes it quite a difficult process on the college end, let alone the worry and preparation on the student end.
Yeah. So now the process at the college, all of these admissions counselors, they're all looking at different applications that are coming in, and then do they have a separation of piles of what they do? How does that all work?
Well, it used to be folders carrying around, but everything goes on a computer now. But they organize by region. There's usually a dean or director of admissions, a couple assistants for administrative reasons, and then they'll have a team of, let's say, 16 admissions officers, okay? There'll be a senior person and an assistant. And one will have the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington. One will have New Jersey. So they always organize by region. And let's say Princeton probably covers, let's say 6 regions. two admissions staff members for each region. So they get to know the schools, they visit the regions, they have some idea what to do. And now when you get a volume though, like the 30,000, they will have a dozen or more readers. So when the applications come in, they first go to the readers, they make a rating, and then they pass them along to the full-time staff to do a more sophisticated reading and decide who to admit, who to deny, who to waitlist, things like that. So the process is a very complicated one, I say, in a limited amount of time. And the students more and more look alike. In other words, high SAT scores, they have activities, they do this, they write the essays. So the distinctions between the very top and the next level, it's not an easy job at all to make those distinctions.
Okay, so now there's always a lot of parents out there that say, well, it's all based on quotas. You know, you have your Asians that come in, or your Europeans, and then you have your African Americans, your Hispanics. Is that true at the college level, or is it really just they come in and then everybody just gets to pick which one is right?
There's no quota system. I mean, if you talk to students from Princeton or faculty members, administration from Princeton, there's an idea of how to put together a class. So many athletes, so many engineers, so many alumni sons and daughters, so many people from California, from China, from whatever. And you have a general idea how to compose a class, but there's no quota, there's no limit. Like the engineers, they like to fill the engineering school. They want chemical, electrical, whatever. And so maybe there's 200 to 250. But there's not a quota say, we're going to get to 215, we're going to stop admitting engineers.
Right.
But it kind of more or less forms a class in similar ways from year to year. But if the strength is stronger in the engineers, they may admit fewer some other category. Okay. And frankly, Princeton, ironically, right now, is looking for students who are Pell Grant recipients, which means some of the lower income students. Right. So their idea of diversity, other than geographical and ethnic and all the rest of these things, is basically a financial diversity. They really think for them that's a high priority now.
Gotcha. So now, how about these extracurricular activities? Does that mean a lot at the college level?
Yeah, it does, and it depends. And my general rule when I work with students is if it's a large public institution, a lot of applications, the computer basically generates most of the admissions list. So in let's say Rutgers, for example, it's probably about 75 to 80% academics, GPA, SAT scores, course level, okay? And then the essays, the activities, the volunteer work, all the rest of it is probably 20%, 25%. At Princeton and the Ivy League, the very competitive college, is probably 60% academics and 40% personal. The reason is the academics kid look so much alike. They've got A averages, they've got high SAT scores. We're going to make a lot of decisions based on these personal qualities, who has really done outstanding things in the way of talent, volunteer work, competitive exams and things like that. So the more selective and the smaller the schools, the more carefully they look at the extracurriculars, because the academics are closely bunched. If it's a very large, what we call flagship public, they're going to do more on SAT and GPA. But look at the essay, look at the leadership, look at the other things.
Okay, so now, do they grade the high schools that are out there?
They have a general sense. They keep track of the students from each high school and how they do in that college. And they will know, for example, let's say I get this question often, is it worthwhile to send a student to a private school like Lawrenceville or Princeton High or whatever? And I always say, don't do it just to get a leg up in admissions, do it for whatever the other academic or other reasons might be. Yeah. However, they may over time see that a B+ student at Lawrenceville does about as well as an A- student at Princeton High. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, once they keep records, they may make some adjustments based on the strength of that school and the population. But generally speaking, they try and find the best students within any particular school. That's pretty important.
Okay, and how about sports? Does sports mean a lot?
Yeah, sports do mean a lot. At Princeton, where it was tag, if a student had an extra benefit in addition to what we've just talked about, we'd say that would be a tag student. That was back in the days we did folders, and a red tag might be an athlete, a yellow tag might be a minority, a blue tag might be a legacy or whatever. So each of those tags mean we're going to give that student a careful look, okay? And so, for example, with the athletes, there's an organized system called the academic index that they've got to run the calculation. And once a student passes that certain standard, then they go on a list and they get a significant increase in their admission chances, as do ethnic minorities, as do some legacy sons and daughters of Princeton, but not as much as it used to be. That used to be a bigger tag, and now legacy is a more minor tag. And then there's various other things. Faculty, sons and daughters get a little bit, some development cases, some students from a state that they haven't seen a student, maybe a student from Idaho might get a little bit of a boost. So other than just the straight credentials, if a student has what's called a tag going for them, they're going to get a little bit of a leg up in a process.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about international students? Do they go through the same process?
Yeah, they go through the same process. It depends what kind of school they come from. If they come from an international school, I'm familiar with the Chinese students. They take AP courses, they have activities, they do things. So they look a lot like the American students, so that's not so hard. But a lot of them come from Chinese schools where it's a little more difficult because you don't get the same kind of information. So you've got the GPA and the SAT. In those cases, a Chinese student coming from a non-international school, the essay and a recommendation, things like that are quite important because you just don't have as many pieces of information to go on.
Yeah. So now, how about financially? A lot of these schools are expensive.
Yes.
Right. And a lot of parents are always looking for, how do I get the money to pay for college?
Right.
Right. So I know need-based is really big at the college level because it's easier to get them in because they're need-based.
Right.
How about the people that are probably the majority out there, which is the middle class?
Right. Okay, so what you have to know about financial aid is there's basically two kind of possibilities to get money. One is merit aid and one is need aid. Merit aid, about 9% of merit aid comes from the colleges themselves. And they give merit aid based on the quality of the student within that applicant pool. Very general rule, the top 10% of the applicants based on SAT, GPA, whatever that rating they give, will probably get somewhere about tuition, scholarship, or maybe more, maybe a little bit less.
Right.
The next 10% might get $5,000, $10,000, whatever. And if they're below that, they're probably not going to get merit aid. They're just going to try and bring the best students into that institution by giving them some money, okay? Mm-hmm. And particularly for privates, to give a tuition discount to compete with the public institutions in that state. So that's the kind of merit aid. There are things called outside scholarships that one can apply for and bring money from outside, but most of the money comes from the colleges themselves. So that's the merit aid, basically academic oriented.
Now, does every college in the United States have merit aid?
No, the Ivy League does not have merit aid at all. The Ivy League is need only, as are Williams and Amherst and some schools like that. But probably 95% of the schools have merit aid. Okay. So then we got the need-based side. All schools have need-based aid. Normally what they do is they use what I call other people's money, okay? For example, Rutgers will use a lot of state money, a lot of federal money. There's a lot of federal and state programs, need-based aid. So they will fill the student's need up with as much money as they can, and if they got some of their own institutional funds, they might give the student what's called a grant. Scholarship is merit, grant is need-based, gift aid. You don't have to repay. Mm-hmm. When you do need-based aid, whatever the amount you're eligible for, it's normally put in what's called a package. A grant, hopefully, a low interest loan rate, a subsidized loan, and a work-study job. So normally when a student gets an aid package, it's not all grant. They've got to work, they've got to borrow, and then they get what's called gift aid. Okay? But a school, institution like the Ivy League, fortunately, although they're very expensive, now they're all over $60,000 for everything, they do have endowments with scholarship funds. So they do it, while they're very expensive on one hand, they give institutional grant at a much higher rate than a school like Rutgers was, which would have very little institutional grant money. So it's not unusual for a family who applies for financial aid, let's say they get in Rutgers and they get in Princeton, that Princeton will be as affordable as Rutgers because Princeton will fill up with grant aid to the amount the student needs. Rutgers will do what they do, and it'll probably be a comparable decision to whether to go to Rutgers or Princeton based on the bottom line cost of that family. That can happen.
So now, a person that has an extracurricular activity, the mom and dad are well off, doing really well. Can those people get money at the college level even though they're well off?
Well, what they do, they should check out their need possibilities first. They can go on a College Board website and run what's called a calculator. They can go on a college website and run what's called the net price calculator. Unless the family clearly has enough money to pay for every college a student is thinking of applying to, they should at least find out what the aid system will ask them to give. And if it's over the cost of the highest college, they wouldn't bother. If it's anywhere near that or below, they want to start going through the aid process, which is fill out the federal form, which is called the FAFSA. And for a number of institutions, what's called the profile, these institutions I talked about that have their own money. And then they would go through the whole aid process and hopefully get an award letter, which contains enough money to make it possible to go to that school. Okay?
Interesting. Yeah. So now people that are trying to get into certain schools, it just depends on the school that they're picking. Now, do you prefer people picking like a private school compared to a public school? Is there more money at the private school?
You can't really tell until you get the aid award letters. Okay, so when the students I deal with, let's say that they don't have enough money to pay for all the schools. I think they want to apply to Rutgers, TCNJ, whatever, to get that basically in-state, relatively inexpensive. Well, it's still going to cost between $25,000 and $30,000.
Right.
But compared to these other numbers, that's inexpensive.
Yeah.
And then maybe get a private college where there's high in the applicant pool. Remember I mentioned the top 10 or 20%, where they're probably going to get a merit scholarship. So let's say they apply to Seton Hall or Fairleigh Dickinson, and they're good enough to get a $20,000 or $30,000 scholarship. That makes their total bottom line equivalent to Rutgers TCNJ.
Right.
Then you have the more expensive schools that you might try and just hope that need-based award works well enough that you've got Seton Hall, you've got Rutgers and Princeton, and basically the bottom line might even be the same, and you can choose for educational reasons. Now that's an ideal situation.
Yeah.
But I think if you want to take advantage of your in-state subsidized tuition, I think no matter what. And you want to maybe pick a private college where you're strong in the pool, and if you got the dream school at Georgetown or Northwestern or Duke or whatever it is, apply there, hope the need-based system works for you, so you've got at least some choices to make.
So now, how about Betterton College Planning? What is that all about? How does that all work?
Well, that's my one-person business. I've been doing that for 10 years. I pick about 20 students per class. I just have my senior class now. Some of them applied early, and now they're all getting ready to apply for the January regular decision. And I work with them fairly closely. The advantage I have compared to high school counselors who are very good, I start earlier. I start usually in their sophomore year, so I have more time to build up their credentials. And frankly, I've got just a little more time to spend with them because the typical high school counselor has anywhere from 200 to 400 student load. So I've got 20 students, 25 students. I can start early. I can spend a little more time with them. But I'm not knocking high school counselors. If the student has a good counselor, good relationship and work, I think they should go there first. If that's not so good for them, then they would come to someone like me, who's called an independent college counselor.
Right. Now, what exactly do you do with them? What's the process that you take with these kids?
Well, in my case, what I do is I give them a rating just like the admissions office does. I give them an academic rating, I give a personal rating. And then we work on improving that rating, because eventually, for better or for worse, they'll turn into a set of numbers. The only way shorthand to take care of 30,000, 20,000 applicants is to have an academic number and a personal number. So I go through the same kind of evaluating system that the college does, and we work to improve the numbers on the academic side, the personal side as much as possible. So they're in the best version of themselves once they apply. And then come the August, September, October, the senior year, we work on a final application list, the final college list. Then we start working on the applications. Are you going to apply any place early? We do the essays. I do practice interviews in case they're going to have an interview. And we basically go through this fall right now, which is busy for me, in the early round, and then now we're doing the regular round. Hopefully they'll have 5 or 6 colleges they're admitted to with some choices. Their dream school maybe, maybe not. And if they're a financial aid person, maybe they get the aid award, or maybe they get some merit money.
So do you help them pick the schools as well?
I advise them. They create their own list initially. I give them some tips on college visits and how to get, but once they come up with a list, it's usually the summer before their senior year, I will go over with them, is it the right major, the right location, the right size, right whatever. And then particularly, what are the chances of getting in? So if they've got all these dream schools with relatively small chances, I will add what we would call match and safety schools and things like that. So they'll originate the list, but I'll make sure it's well balanced to where they want to go, what major they want, and they've got a reasonable chance to get in a number of those schools.
Yeah, so now there's well over 3,000 colleges in the United States. So a lot of these kids, they tend to pick schools like Notre Dame and Princeton and so on and so forth, right? Because they're all well-known name schools. How about the smaller schools that people don't really know that are out there? Do you ever tell those kids, hey, you know, there's these other little schools here that you never heard of that
that's
are
a good question.
academics?
The typical student I get wants to go to a larger university. They always say, I want to go to school larger than my high school. And I see Duke playing basketball or Notre Dame playing football or cheering or fainting their faces or whatever they do. And that's kind of where they want to go first, okay? And I would say, do you know about small colleges and do you know about the quality of education? I said, do me a favor, at least visit some small colleges. Go see Haverford or go see Bowdoin or go see whatever it happens to be and get on campus and see what it's like and talk to people. So ideally, now we've got all these financial reasons, we've got where you're going to get in reasons. I like to see them having maybe a large university, a mid-sized university, and some small colleges in that mix, so they've got some choices there as well. Yeah. So it's a complicated matrix to put all this together.
Yeah, so because there's a lot of very good academic schools that are small.
Right, then, excellent. You've got a closer relationship with your teachers, you have smaller classes, and if you want to go fancy, you can go to grad school, right? And I would say, get a good, solid education, do well, and if you want to go to an MBA, you want to go here or there, you've got a very good background for that.
Yeah, so that's a big key, right?
Yeah.
So now, working with a small group of kids, do you find any other little quirks that they might have, or personality traits that maybe a college wouldn't like, or where you have to fix it? Does that ever come into play?
Personality traits. Well, if it shows up in the essay, I obviously take a look at the essay. It's considered to be bad form to kind of brag in your essay. And I do with these kids, the high ability kids, they want to keep more and more and more. And I say, okay, for the essay, let's just bring it down a notch. Okay, let's tell a little story about yourself. And then I do practice interviews, okay? And frankly, I've told a student every now and then, if they ask you to do an interview, pass by, okay? Right? But on the other hand, if some of them are very good, and that's going to increase their application chances because they're very outgoing, they're very articulate, whatever. But most of them are quite good. But just every once in a while, I'll say, maybe you want to pass on the interviews. But that's pretty unusual.
Yeah. So now, and usually, what's the amount of schools that kids usually pick with you?
I'd say 10 to 12. What I like to do is have maybe 5 or 6 or 7 what I call the core area. It's either, my match is going to be a little bit easier or a little bit difficult, and then maybe 2 dream schools over here, just keep your fingers crossed, okay? Because you can't really talk them out of it, you know? And then the safety schools over here, not only to get in, but that's also where the merit scholarships come into play. So maybe 10 or 12, but I like to see the core of them, what I call a realistic college list. I think that's the single most important thing. I want to see them get in at least 4 or 5 colleges, okay? To me, that's very important. And they can decide on all these variables we talked about where they're going to go to school.
Right. So we're coming to the end of our show.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you like that, huh? So usually I ask my guests, what advice do you want to give to the parents out there? The sons and daughters are going through the process right now. What's some of the advice that you can give to those parents?
Yeah, I'd say relax. I mean, they really do get wound up on all this college stuff, and I know it becomes very important, you know, in the neighborhood. They go to the parties and they see where the cousins getting in or the whatever, and they really get going. I get calls from 8th graders, and I say that's too early. In fact, I get calls from freshmen, and I say finish your freshman year, be a normal high school student. Just get started with some good grades, some activities, but let's appreciate those high school years as high school years and not have them all depend on what college am I going to do, when do I start, when do I prep for the SAT and things like that. So it's good to be concerned, it's good to start early, it's good to understand all the things I've talked about, but let's not get carried away with it. Funny coming from me, but anyway, that's the attitude I have.
Good. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, so you've been watching The Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva. Until next time.